Hello everybody. It is December 9th, 2025 here in the United States of America. And in today's video, I would actually like to talk about the European Union. Now this video was actually supposed to be up on Sunday, but I actually never had the chance to record anything. I had some family obligations, so I figured I would do the geopolitical video today and the video about United States politics. Hopefully Thursday or Friday, depending on how busy my day is. I wish my schedule could be a little more reliable. I'm doing the best I can here, but between my work schedule and family life, sometimes it gets a little bit difficult. But what I want to do is talk about the European Union and what the European Union is today and what it wishes it could be. Now, ever since the fall of the Roman Empire, there has always been this deep desire within the European psyche, I'd say specifically Central and Western Europe, to reunite the continent under one single political entity. Europe has been fractured and warring against itself, I'd say, ever since the fall of the Western Roman Empire. Now, the East continued on until 1453, but the West fractured well before that, and there have been multiple attempts, I would say, to resurrect some kind of Roman Empire, something analogous to it, but each attempt has ended up with a cheap imitation. You have the Holy Roman Empire, which was not considered a true heir to the Roman Empire in really any capacity, not that it was an abject failure, but I don't think many people consider that a worthy successor. You had Napoleon's attempt to dominate the continent, which again ended in failure after, I believe, roughly 12 years. You had Mussolini's desire to recreate the Roman Empire with Italy as its center, and then you obviously had the conquests of Hitler. And what came after that, there was other attempts in between all these, but those are just the main ones I can think of. And then I think the European elite, who still, regardless of how liberal they present themselves to be, still have this deep desire to unite the continent. And instead of doing it by force, I think what they tried was a long-term plan where they would unite the continent economically, open the borders, and then eventually dominate it politically. Now, the issue is the people behind this project inherited European civilization. They didn't build it. They don't know how to manage a civilization. These people are, I would say, modern liberal. And when I say liberal, I don't mean liberalism like the United States political version of being a liberal, but these people are Western liberals who really have no clue how to build a civilization, and they can try to remake and mold a civilization into something they wish it to be, but as far as actually maintaining something or building something they've inherited, I think these people are very awful at their jobs. Now, this long-term plan to, I would say, turn Europe into some kind of confederation of, well, I wouldn't even say that. I think the ultimate goal was to completely strip all smaller European powers of their sovereignty, first economically and then completely politically. And the power would centralize within, I would say, either France or Germany, considering those are the two most powerful continental powers. Those two countries are absolutely not going to give up the degree of sovereignty they demand the rest of the continent give up. I would say the political system will ultimately be dominated by one of those two. Now, France is a little more nationalistic than Germany is, but I think this modern iteration of this new Rome is going to be centered in either Paris or Berlin. I mean, they could say it's Brussels, but the ultimate power, I would say, lies more with France than it does with Germany. France is a little more independent, nationalistic. Germany is perpetually on its knees and apologizing for itself. Now, I think ultimately this project is doomed to failure, as anybody can see. This isn't going to be the new great European empire, and one of the reasons why, as I mentioned before, the people running it are nothing but bureaucrats. They're not politicians. These people aren't intelligent in any way, shape, or form. They inherited a civilization they have no idea what to do with. They inherited a civilization that already had serious problems and fractures within itself, I would say ever since the Enlightenment. I would say ever since the death of the European monarchy, Europe has floundered and been mired in constant revolutions, upheavals, and it's always had wars, but as far as politically, it can't seem to find itself again. It can't seem to find a real identity that is at peace with the rest of its history. I think they're trying very hard to run the civilization through the lens of modern liberalism, and I think modern liberalism can't maintain a powerful and united state. It doesn't know how to do it. I think every country that runs itself as a modern liberal democracy seems to be spiraling down the drain due to sheer incompetence. The bringing in of massive amounts of immigrants very quickly in a short period of time is tipping the demographics in a way that I think would cause a civil conflict in some of the key states. It's definitely caused a lot of tension within France and Germany, and even though the UK is no longer part of the EU, it's caused quite a bit of tension there. If you're going to run a civilization, the dumbest thing you could probably do is to destroy cultural and social cohesion within it as you're trying to unite it, to create massive political movements against yourself if you're attempting to actually unite the continent. What you would want to do is to unite it in a way that minimizes this kind of resistance. But because the European elite are so afraid of being looked at as too nationalistic, well, there's nothing appealing about them. Now they have this, they promote this idea of like Western liberal values, of tolerance, and of like this beacon of civilization on a hill that everybody desires to be part of, and they just want to like something like the Federation from Star Trek. I think that's how they see themselves, and the reality of their governance is certainly not, I would say, how they don't see what the rest of us see when they look in the mirror. They look in the mirror and they see brilliance personified. They see some of the greatest minds on the planet building the greatest civilization that has ever been, and I think many of us from the outside looking in, especially here in the States, see just this absolute dysfunctional political project that's doomed to failure. If you look at Eastern Europe, for example, Hungary. Hungary has its own national interests that it cannot afford to give up because it needs its economy to stay afloat. And to keep its economy afloat, it needs cheap Russian energy because there's really no other good alternative for Hungary. Hungary is not interested in getting to a conflict with the Russian Federation, but the heads of the European Union have come out and, shockingly enough, said that Hungary did not have their permission to engage in diplomacy with the leader of the Russian Federation, as if in this economic union, any state within this economic union would actually need permission to engage in any kind of foreign policy. Last time I checked, France and Germany don't need permission to engage and to run their own foreign policy, but the small states do, and that's what I mentioned before, that eventually the smaller, weaker politically, the smaller, weaker states that have the smallest economies and the smallest militaries would be bullied into compliance to where they would essentially just become member states in a federation that gave them like nominal sovereignty and independence as far as like, here's your language and your national anthem. Yeah, okay, you're Hungary, but you're not really. Yeah, you're beholden to the political will of the driving forces behind the European Union. There's been friction with Poland. There was so much friction with the UK that the UK left, and well, the UK has never really thought of itself as part of the continent. It's always been something a little bit different, and I think Brexit was always bound to happen, but there's a lot of animosity against the incompetence of the EU, the foolishness of it, the hypocrisy of it. This is a civilization. Well, this is a civilizational project that constantly talks about Western liberal values, yet is routinely advocating that people be put in prison for expressing certain opinions in public. Now, people will point to Russia and China and say, well, Russia and China, they don't have free speech either. Yes, but they don't pretend like they do. Their entire foundation isn't built upon this this vague notion of like Western liberal values like the EU has. Like the EU just looks like one giant hypocritical mess run by bureaucrats that have no business running like an ice cream shop. A bunch of people that think of themselves as geniuses, but actually have no real good ideas of their own, and every idea they implement ends in disaster. And I think one of the reasons why Europe is floundering so badly, especially with this Ukraine issue, I think the Europeans want the Ukrainians to think of themselves as European, and they want this message to kind of permeate through Europe that, we have to defend Ukraine to the bitter end. We have to, no matter what, because they're European. We would do this for any member state in Europe. Guys, we're all in this together. Meanwhile, they actually do things that badly hurt their own member states, and there's quite a few people in EU countries that don't buy any of this rhetoric. But Europe, I think, is now desperate to try to finish this project, to try to bring about the true fruition of the EU project, because now they're stuck between two of the world's great powers. They're being dominated politically by the United States, and the Russian Federation held most of the cards economically for a long time and still dominates Eastern Europe, and has on its own, I would say, a better military than all of the European states combined. Definitely the most experienced military. So Europe is in this position now where it's got one great power to its east and one great power constantly meddling in its internal affairs, coming from the west, and they're stuck right in the middle, and there's not really a lot they can do. They can complain, they can whine, they can make fun of President Trump or Vladimir Putin all they want, but it's really funny because when President Trump says jump, they all say, well, how high? They don't offer much resistance to the whims of the president, regardless of how much they say they hate him, because they have no leverage. They have nothing. Europe doesn't have its own resources. They have to bring in energy from outside sources. They either have to bring in energy from the Russian Federation, or they have to bring energy in from the United States. France's holdings in Africa are gone. There is no colonial holdings anywhere off the continent. Europe has to import a lot of what it has, and it's not self-sufficient in any way, shape, or form. It is extremely vulnerable, and they know that. And I think this last grasp at keeping the European project alive has to do a lot with complete and total civilizational insecurity. Europe is not strategically in a good place these days, and is quickly falling into irrelevance. And I don't want to see that happen. I actually don't really have an issue with some kind of united Europe project if it is done correctly and in a way that actually addresses the legitimate concerns of its member states without stepping on them, with actually something that would make Europe want to be part of a united civilization of their own free will and volition, rather than being economically blackmailed into being part of it by a bunch of people that have no business leading anything. I'm not against the idea. If European states wish to remain independent and sovereign on their own, then that's fantastic. That's fine. They should be allowed. But if Europe does voluntarily want to come together in some kind of confederation for the sake of pan-European interests, that's okay. I don't have a project, or I don't have a problem with that project. But that project has to be managed in a way that takes far more skill and savvy and understanding of geopolitics and the internal politics of its member states. It has to be run by far more competent people than it is now, or it's absolutely doomed to failure. And like it or not, it's going to have to take some kind of nationalistic bent that leans on its ancient history, that leans on the idea of Rome and the empires that came after. It kind of harkens back to the glory days of a united European civilization, despite the bloodshed and horrors unleashed by Rome. It's still a history that many Europeans look back on now, many centuries later, with a bit of fondness. And if you really want to get people interested in the idea of United Europe project, well, then that's something that you would have to kind of use as propaganda, and also to this mass migration to keep the economies afloat because Europeans aren't having babies. Well, that's not going to work. It's just going to rip the continent apart. I think it's a suicidal and stupid policy. I mean, if you really want your citizens to start having children, then you need to start promoting religiosity and get rid of these liberal values and make people actually value the things they used to value. I think people across the West are just fat, lazy, complacent, well-fed, nihilistic, no interest in the future, no interest in anything greater than what they can consume next on Netflix. There's no interest in having kids. There's no interest in continuing the civilization because you've propagandized them for decades that none of that's important and that's a relic of the past. Well, now it's biting the people that are running the European project right in the butt because they don't have enough people having kids to actually keep Europe afloat. So then they bring in massive waves of immigrants to repopulate the continent, thinking they could make them European. And that's not going to work either because that's not how human beings operate. Simply just moving to a plot of soil and calling yourself something doesn't mean you actually embody the values and the cultural attitudes and appreciate the history of those people. Can that happen? Yeah, and there's immigrants that do successfully integrate themselves into whatever country they move into, despite their country of origin. It happens. But there's a way to do that to make that a more likely outcome than the way these European bureaucrats do it. But that's really all I wanted to talk about in this video. It's just something that I've been thinking about throughout the week. If I have any European viewers out there, let me know what you think. Leave your opinions in the comment section. What do you think about a united Europe? Would you rather see your countries remain completely sovereign with maybe one or two states essentially having the lion's share of the influence over the continent? Would you be okay with being part of a greater European project so long as it was something actually for the greater good of Europe and that harkened back to those times where Europe was under a singular political entity? What's your opinions on that? I'm sure there's quite a few people that would vehemently be adamant about being sovereign and independent, and other people that think some kind of united European civilization is a good thing. But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, drop me a like, subscribe to my channel, and see you on the next one.